Today, I'm going to show you one of the most epic final table battles I've ever witnessed.
For me, is the most entertaining and fun final table I've ever commentated on at the Triton.
Our adventure begins during the Triton Super High Roller Series in London. The world's most elite high-stakes players competed to win the 40k Mystery Bounty Tournament. After a long battle, only 3 players remained. MTT end boss Stephen Chidwick, the GOAT Phil Ivey, and Wsop main event champion Espen Ystad. In today's video, we'll examine the most interesting hands from this action-packed final table. We'll also talk with Espen and break down his thought process. Get ready to enjoy some quality poker. Our story begins in event number 3, 40k Mystery Bounty. There were 133 entries with about $5 million in prizes. Now, this final table was an absolute pleasure to watch. Just when you thought one player had it locked up, the chip lead would get overtaken again and again.
The craziest three-way I've ever played. It was like so much back and forth, the stacks kept shifting, the chip lead was overtaken like 9-10 times, I don't know, like it was crazy.
Ystad, Ivey, and Chidwick battled it out for almost 2 hours before one of them was eliminated. Espen himself demonstrated remarkable resilience, recovering from a less than 5 big blind stack on 3 separate occasions. Just so you understand how tough these players are, Stephen Chidwick is regarded by many as one of the strongest MTT player in the world right now, and Phil Ivey has been dominating the poker scene across many different formats for over 20 years and is largely regarded as the greatest of all time. And then we have Espen Ystad. Now, Espen is relatively new to the scene of high roller poker, but he has been decimating the high-stakes poker scene lately. He won the Wsop main event in 2022 and has just been on a killer streak ever since. Espen Ystad is a GTO Wizard Pro, but he doesn't rest on his laurels. He's a relentless student of the game, and he uses GTO Wizard to learn optimal strategies to crush his competition. This video is being recorded well into the future, but we were lucky enough to get Espen's thoughts on the event shortly after it happened. In this video, we'll dive into the mind of a GTO prodigy and see what we can learn. Espen, you were up against some of the toughest players in the industry. How confident were you going into this final table?
I was playing with 2 of the absolute goats of poker, so how confident can I be? But no, honestly, I felt pretty confident going into it. I didn't feel like I was outclassed and I had to like take high variance line to reduce their skill edge or anything like this. I was just trying to play my game, although like I don't know every spot in this format because we're playing 3-handed with big blind ante. I think Chidwick had a bit more of a theoretical approach and Phil was playing a bit more on just 20 years of being the GOAT experience, you know? So I had to approach it a bit differently with those 2, but I felt pretty confident and I don't think I've too much.
For this video, we've custom solved the Mystery Bounty format using the exact stack sizes that were present during this final table. So you receive 2 benefits: insights from a renowned pro and GTO solutions tailored to this exact scenario. Soon we'll upload these solutions to our app so you can compare all of the different hands and see how top tier players compare to GTO approaches. We plan to do this for many big final tables in the future so that you can follow along and learn as you watch. Before we start our epic battle, let's back up one hand. In a tough 4-handed match, a young Johannes Straver got coolered with 9s against Ivey's jacks 18 big blinds deep, busting in 4th place. But don't feel too bad for him. Karma saw fit to have him draw the coveted 400k Mystery Bounty. He actually ended up taking home more money than anyone else in the entire tournament. Just 2 hands later, Chidwick picked up pocket aces.
Hello, number 1.
And Espen picked up King-Queen offsuit.
Hello, King-Queen. There is a world where he attacks pre-flop, is going to just call, perhaps get saved unless King High, Queen High, that'd be bad.
A dangerous place to be in, 25 big blinds deep. Here's the game theory optimal solution for this spot we just witnessed. Chidwick opens on the button for 2 big blinds, and it folds to Espen in the big blind holding King-Queen offsuit. Now the commenters briefly mentioned that there is a world in which he could have attacked pre-flop, and this is true. King-Queen off can actually shove here at some frequency, which is kind of surprising to me given how deep they are. Nevertheless, Espen elects to call and take a flop. However, Espen picked up top pair on the turn.
Ouch.
Finds top pair on the turn, and note the equities shift only slightly.
and got stacked on the river.
4.7, leaving himself just 25k back, and Espen Ystad is in the blender and gets snap called,
leaving him with just 2 big blinds. The very next hand, Espen picks up king 4 off from the small blind and shoves. Chidwick, smelling blood in the water, snap calls with 3-2 suited. Chidwick picked up a pair on the turn. The sweat was real. It looked like he was done, but that pair was counterfeited on the river and Espen survived.
and the show goes on, Randy.
Now, some players may be confused as to why Espen's shoving with king 4 off and Chidwick just called with 3-2 suited, but keep in mind, Espen has almost no chips left, and there's a huge 70k average bounty in play, so this has to just go in immediately. Of course, Chidwick with his 3-2 suited cannot fold. He's got to call 100% of hands here, and he does so without hesitation. A couple hands later, Espen picked up a beautiful 10-8 suited on the button and mucks it. I can feel the cash game players just cringing internally right now. How can you fold 10-8 suited? It's so pretty, man. You're on the button. But keep in mind that Espen's got like 4.5 big blinds. He has no implied odds. He's just playing the raw equity of his hand. Just any king is going to be better than this. Now, it may look like this hand is in his opening range, but if you take a look at the EV, it doesn't want to necessarily shove this hand. It wants to open 3 big blinds, okay? That's weird. Why is the solver wanting to raise 3 instead of just shoving 4.5? It seems really counterintuitive and non-human. Well, it's actually a really clever idea. You see, if he raises 3, and let's say that we get a shove and a call, he can actually get away from this hand. And he can basically look at Phil Ivey and say, hey, if you want to play ICM Russian roulette with Chidwick, that's fine. I will happily take second. So that's the idea behind this. Now, if only one player shoves, he of course has to call any 2, but he can get away if both players shove before action gets back to him. But as Lady Luck would have it, just a few hands later, Espen picked up ace-8 offsuit in the small blind and managed to hold and double up against Chidwick's jack-10 offsuit. Play continued like this for another 10 minutes, with Espen dodging bullets like Neo from the Matrix and slowly grinding up to a respectable stack. Then we saw a really interesting hand where he limped in with queen 4 offsuit from the small blind, and you can see he's almost up to Chidwick's stack at this point. Chidwick checks his option with 8-7 off, and we take a flop. The flop comes king jack 4. Espen, with about 15 bigs, decides the very first thing he should do, put on his sunglasses.
Oh, I see Daniel's in chat here as well. Putting on glasses when they are like 15 big blinds deep is a bit LOL. Oh, that's funny. So when do I put them on? Is it only above 25 bigs? Is it 50 bigs? I'm not really sure how that works. Maybe I can send DNX a DM and ask like if he can give me any coaching on that.
Espen leads out 1 big blind, and Chidwick, who I think is supposed to fold here, actually puts in a min-click raise with 8 high. Very interesting play. Espen makes the call, and they'll take a turn card. Now, Chidwick picks up a fantastic turn card here. The backdoor diamonds are there. He's got some straight potential. Espen, of course, checks to the aggressor. Action on Chidwick. He mulls it over for a while and decides to check it back. Unfortunately, Chidwick picks up a better pair on the river. Now that said, Espen comes through with a fantastic bluff at this point. After all of that grinding to get his stack back up, he puts it all on the line for a huge bluff with bottom pair. I think a lot of players would just try and take their showdown value at this point, but Espen knows when to turn a made hand into a bluff, and he does so successfully, pushing Chidwick off his hand. And so, with fearlessness and determination, Espen grinded his way up to the chip leader in this spot. In this next hand, he opens 10-8 offsuit from the button, actions on Stephen Chidwick with queen 10 of hearts. And instead of shoving, Chidwick comes in with this very odd 3-bet size. He raises about 2/3 of his stack, 5 million, and of course, Ivy and Espen fold to the raise. So let me check this hand with the solver, because I'm not quite sure what's going on here. So here we see the strategy, and Espen on the button with a big chip lead should be opening 10-8 offsuit for a small size. But we see that the solver is also mixing in some shoves. And so one of the questions I had for him was, how do you manage your strategy when the solver is suggesting to split between a min raise and a shove? Does he want to split, or does he try and simplify to one thing or the other?
I think 10-8 off is going to be too weak to shove here, but I would split my range into min raise and open shove for sure. they had effectively like 20 and 15 bigs, or 19 and 16, or something like that. So with a bounty especially, I do think I get to play quite a bit of open shoves here. I would shove a bunch of pairs, a bunch of offsuit ace-x, maybe the smallest suited ace-x, bunch of suited broadways and suited middling cards. Like if I had 10-8 suited, for example, I think I would just have to be all in as the covering stack here. First of all, they have to call a bit tighter because of the ICM. Second of all, when they do call, I can win a bounty, so that adds quite a bit of EV as well. The non-all-in 3-bet sizing that Chidwick chose is basically just, it is an all-in sizing. It's just like a fake all-in, right? Where he's going all in and he's always going to call when I go all in, but he leaves himself the option to fold if Ivy goes all in and then I go all in on top of that, because then he's up against two very strong ranges, and at that point a significant part of your all-in range isn't strong enough to just call off anymore. In terms of what sizing he used, I would probably have gone a bit smaller. It's not like I can defend a lot versus even 4 million here, right? Which is going to be like 10 bigs. So I think probably in his shoes I would have gone a bit smaller, but maybe decided to size up because of the bounty aspect. Because I will actually be able to take some flops here in position. If he makes his fake all-in, so to say, too small, I will be able to take some flops in position here, especially with the bounty in play.
And so it appears that these weird not-all-in 3-bets are a key idea, a trade secret, if you will, of these bounty tournaments. Now, play continued like this for another half an hour of tense battle between these three poker legends. The chip lead was overtaken probably half a dozen times. Players came back from the brink of death. Nobody was letting go. Now, I want to resume here, and I could have shown you guys a bunch of sweats and like really crazy spots, but I think you might get a little bit of value from one of the quieter hands that occurred in this session. Espen opened 8-7 offsuit. He actually limped in from the small blind and simply folded to a raise from Chidwick, who had ace-king. Now, why is this notable? So here's the solver strategy for this spot. First thing to note is that players have approximately equal stacks. Second thing to note is that the solver wants to shove ace-7 offsuit a decent chunk of the time. That's a bit scary, but it's also limping a decent chunk of the time. I think these are pretty hard to find. If he had shoved, he probably would have lost. However, he limped instead, and of course, a hand like ace-king wants to go for a small raise. You notice it's not shoving, it's not raising big, it's going for the smallest possible raise to get as much value as possible. I wanted to ask Espen, what do you do when the solver tells you to mix between a shove and a limp? Again, do you want to simplify to one size, or does he think there's more value in employing both strategies simultaneously?
The 8-7 off here felt like a very natural limp for me. As we can see in the sim here, it actually shoves quite a bit. And these shoves are kind of hard to find in-game for me personally. They feel kind of counterintuitive, you know? They don't really feel strong enough. Like the 9-8 suited, 7-8 suited, 7-6 suited, like all the suited ones, they feel very natural. Of course, they are nice because they fold out a bunch of hands that dominate us. And when we get called, we have decent equity because we're suited, we're connected, so we have some stuff going on. The 7-6 off and the 8-6 off and all of this, or 8-7 off, they don't really feel strong enough to me, so I'm always a bit surprised when we see these shoving in the sim. The rest of the shoving range looks pretty intuitive to me, like Queen Jack off, King 10 off, some of these like big offsuit stuff, and then like a bunch of offsuit aces, the smallest pairs, and the smallest suited aces. Then you have like some of the magical hands which show up a lot in sims like this, the King 6 off, King 5 suited, Queen 6 suited. These are of course an effect of his calling range, where you're basically folding out some hands that dominate us and you get called by some worse hands. Like King 5 suited, for example, we're folding out like King 6 off, King 7 off, but we're also getting called by Queen Jack suited, Queen 10 suited. So they're kind of magical hands where we fold out some better and we get called by some worse.
You may have noticed that most of these hands have been between Chidwick and Espen, and Ivy has seemed suspiciously quiet over these last few hands, and I think that's for a good reason. In the meantime, Ivy had managed to build up quite a chip lead, just taking his shots as needed and actually playing quite a bit tighter than GTO. Nevertheless, Espen did manage to bust Stephen Chidwick after a very long, hard-fought battle. And so, the final phase of the tournament, the heads-up match between Espen Ystad and Phil Ivy begins, and Ivy's going in with quite the chip lead. Now, before we continue, I wanted to get Espen's thoughts on how he thought Chidwick and Ivy played throughout the tournament.
Chidwick played amazing from what I saw, which is to be expected. I know a lot of people rate him as the number one right now, and have rated him as number one for quite some time. So he's obviously a super strong player. He's played a lot of poker even in the last year. He's been playing every high roller basically and has amazing results. He's also battled online in recent history, so he knows the bounty format, he knows big blind ante, he knows all of these things. He just played great, which was no surprise.
During the 3-player endgame, Ivy had amassed a large chip lead, but we noticed he was playing quite tight instead of abusing this chip lead. Espen, if you're willing to speculate, do you think this was an intentional deviation?
I'm not sure if Ivy was trying to make any intentional deviation or if it's just that he doesn't have a lot of experience playing, first of all, in bounty formats. I don't think Ivy has played that much online since the bounty format became a thing, because the bounties are worth quite a bit even here, right? I think one bounty was worth 70k US or something, so it's still worth quite a bit of chips at this point, even on the final table. And also, we're playing big blind ante, which now Ivy is probably getting more and more used to, but back in the days, big blind ante was not really a thing. So when you were down to 3-handed, you would only have like 3.5 or like 0.35 of a big blind in antes total, right? So you were playing a bit tighter ranges. Now you have to play quite loose because there's so much to fight for in every pot, even 3-handed. So maybe he just isn't used to it enough yet, and he's playing a bit tight because of that maybe.
I think Espen's right. Chidwick is a specialist. He's really, really good at MTTs. But someone like Ivy is a generalist. Ivy is an old school card player, and he plays everything. Omaha, stud, shoe, horse, high-low, 8-game, baccarat. If there are cards and gambling involved, Ivy has won money at it, all right? So I think we can forgive Ivy for playing a little bit tighter than GTO might suggest and passing up on some marginal spots. He still manages to keep up with some of the best players in the world, even in today's solver era. Ivy's strategy of sitting back, avoiding some of these high variance, low EV lines, this can actually be pretty decent strategy in spots where you think players at the table are too aggressive. Essentially, you can sit back and ladder while they all kill each other. Now that said, where this is not going to work is a heads-up match.
Straight in the muck.
In fact, there were several spots where Ivy just open folded, in spots where he basically just should never be open folding due to the big blind ante. I have one more hand to show you guys, and you're going to like this one. Phil Ivy opens his king-queen offsuit from the button, and Espen Ystad defends with 5-4 offsuit. Here we can see the GTO strategy, and we'll notice that king-queen off can either limp or raise. Now, I think Ivy's raising more linearly. He's probably not doing this complicated split, but nevertheless, this hand should obviously play. 5-4 offsuit in Espen's shoes. Very, very clear defend. You don't fold this hand, heads up. So here's the GTO pre-flop solution. Now keep in mind it's a big blind ante format, so the actual calling ranges will change. When I tried to run it myself, it doesn't actually use this 2 big blind size in the big blind ante format. So we're just going to pretend that this is Phil Ivy's opening range and go from there. Here's big blind's calling range. We'll go ahead and plug these ranges into our custom solver and take a flop.
Just a single raise pot alone.
Espen checks everything as he should. Action to Ivy, and a small size is definitely correct here. We can see that lots of hands are getting in the mix. King-Queen, however, this is a reasonably high equity hand, right? We still have like 40-something% without a club, but we'll notice that these hands are just checking back, right? And the reason for this is you don't want to have to fold a hand as strong as King-Queen to a check raise, which is precisely what happened in this situation. So Ivy bets, and of course, Espen raises and takes it down. Now, here's the thing. When facing this bet, 5-4, and in fact, all the straights, they're just pure calling, right? So why is this? Why would a hand like 5-4 just want a pure call? Aren't you worried about the flush coming in, or a 4 or 5 comes and then you've got a good straight and now you have a mediocre straight? Well, for this, I think I will let Espen explain his logic for you.
So I think Ivy was playing a more old school heads-up strategy here where he plays a lot of raises and a lot of folds. I think he folded 3 hands in a small blind, which isn't going to be much of a thing when you're playing big blind ante. You don't really fold that much even with normal ante, right? If you're like 20 bigs deep and you're on the button, you almost limp your entire range already. So with the big blind ante, I don't think there is going to be much folding. and he folded like 3 hands, and I don't know what those 3 hands were, but I do expect that he was playing maybe a bit too tight in the small blind. From that, we can see that he's also playing raising, which also isn't happening that much at this stack depth, right? Solver mostly just limps, but from my perspective, sitting on the other side, it did look like he was playing a bit too tight maybe. On the flop, I flopped a straight obviously. I think I would probably slow play this one if I had a club, like what heuristics I'm looking for in terms of slow playing straights on dangerous boards like this one. I would probably slow play just like a straight with a club, and I think I would slow play if I had like really strong hands that blocked some of the pairs on board. I think I would rather fast play this one than if I flopped. Well, I wouldn't flop a set here anyways because I would be all in with the small pairs, but let's say that I flop a set on some board, I would probably rather slow play that one, where you block his continues. Here that I have a straight and I unblock all his continues in terms of not having any of the pairs on board, it felt like a pretty natural check raise. But as we can see in the solver, I was supposed to pure call this one as well. I think the EV is pretty much the same, but I guess the heuristic here, or the takeaway, is that we're so shallow that not really any bad things can happen, and letting him catch up. We have such an invulnerable hand anyways, even with the 3 clubs on board. Like we can see he has king queen off here with no club, so he's drawing like completely stone dead. Allowing him to catch up or bluff is going to be a reasonable option, so I guess that's why we just slow play this one. We're so shallow that not really any bad things can happen no matter what.
This texture is just so dry that your opponent has so many check folds. I don't fault Ivy for putting chips in there. Do see a lot of calling with this type of hand, but it looks like he will check raise. Doesn't want to kind of lose his customer in case a bad card comes against a hand that would have committed on the flop.
Yeah.
They continued to battle it out for many hands, but in the end, Ivy found himself dominated with King Deuce against Espen's King Jack for his tournament life.
Ace of clubs on the river, and King Jack high is going to seal the victory.
So that's the story of how this young Norwegian pro won his first Triton medal. And for his efforts, he took home over $900,000 in prizes and bounties. But the craziest part is, that wasn't even his biggest win in this series. Espen then went on to place in 4 more Triton events, cashing over $4 million in prizes in just 2 months. Truly a phenomenal run. As the poker tournament reached its conclusion, Espen's journey exemplifies resilience. Short-stacked but undeterred, he came back time and time again, offering an invaluable lesson for poker players everywhere. Find your motivation, consistently bring your A game, and regardless of how many times you stumble, you can still rise to the top.